Are you a leader, manager, entrepreneur, business owner, or knowledge worker? Are you leading people or wondering how to be a better leader in your own life and work? If you are, then you can be experimenting better. Welcome to The Experimental Leader, a podcast that takes a look at the ways leaders are experimenting in their own work. Hosted by Melanie Parrish, we dive into real-life conversations about how people might be using a scientist's mindset and experimenting in their work. Shift your leadership into something that works better. Join us on The Experimental Leader today.
Hello, it is so great to be here live with you today. I'm super excited because I've been doing this podcast for 2 years. It's like, wow, my mother would have said, wow, you hardly stick with anything for 2 years. And that's not completely true at this stage in my life, but I do feel proud in this moment. And I have huge gratitude for my team, Molly and Christine, who have been around on this journey, doing all of the work. I get all the glory and they get all the work, and they do such an amazing job on the back end. And so I'm so grateful for you and the work you do on the Experimental Leader podcast. I'm so grateful to all the guests who have come on the podcast and who have shared their stories. I feel so privileged to get to just have amazing leaders on my podcast, and then I get to ask them whatever I want. So I get to pick their brains and get to hear from them. And I've been thinking about my own leadership, and I got to hang out with a fantastic 2-year-old this weekend. His name is João, and he's from Brazil, and he came over for an Easter egg hunt at our house. And we gave him a superhero cape. And when he put on that superhero cape, he was immediately transformed. He struck a pose and he started to circle the couch at high speed. And he stood differently. And it made me ponder sort of, what was his dream? Like, what was his superhero dream? Who was he when he put the cape on? He was faster. He was stronger. He stood differently. He thought differently. And then I was at a convenience store this morning, and there was a woman, she was probably in her 70s, and she was buying a huge number of lottery tickets. And I think she also had a dream. And she was jovial, and then she walked off, and I thought, oh, she has a dream of having a lot of money. And I was curious about what it was about money that was her dream. Was it dignity? Was it, a great place to live? Was it a great, the ability to travel? Like, there's something about her dream. And everyone we know and everyone we meet and everyone we supervise, if we're in a leadership role, everyone has a dream. And I think it's our job as a leader to know their dream. So my challenge to you is to think about, what's the dream of the people around you, and how can you help them achieve a piece of it? And when I thought about doing our second anniversary edition of our podcast today, and I started to think who I would want to invite on this journey with me, there was one name that popped into my head, and I wanted to invite Marita Fridjhon, who's one of my mentors. She is one of the founders of CRR Global. She is a highly sought after global speaker, and she's the lead author of an article called Relationship Systems Intelligence, Transforming the Face of Leadership. And she's the co-author of the book, Creating Intelligent Teams and System-Inspired Leadership. She's one of my major mentors in coaching. I've known her for decades, and I've known of her work for much longer than that. I am so excited to welcome Marita Fridjhon on my show today.
Thank you, Melanie. I cannot even tell you how delighted and surprised and proud I am to be your guest of honor today, and so grateful for all the work that you've done. And we go back a long way. And you have staying power. I think your mom saw that, but she also sometimes said, just stay a little bit longer.
Thank you.
I know
Thank
that one too. Yes.
Yeah, I kind of, I don't go very, I stick around. I like hanging on to people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, it's such an honor to have you, and I'm so excited about your new book. And I'd love to just ask you what you're most excited about. People find a niche and a place that they have something to say in the world. Why was it important for you to write this book?
Well, it's interesting how often we do things and we think we were planning it, but I think most of the time there was something behind us that was dreaming us into something. So I've started talking about system-inspired leadership. I think the first blog that I posted was in 2015 or something like that. So it's been with me for a while. And where I'm sitting today is a slightly different place, further along the journey from when we started writing the book before COVID pandemic hit. And that is that the concept of systems inspired, whether we put it in front of leadership, in front of coaching, in front of teaching, in front of parenting, I think systems inspired is a key concept for this world that we're living in at the moment, particularly since democracy is coming under so much attack and there's so much going on in the world around democracy, and can we still believe it or not? I think there's something about being systems inspired that is informed by the system and through the system. And I think that's what I'm really, really excited about in terms of how do we impact leaders to think more from that perspective. And that's why I love the book that your book as well, that is about experimental leadership. Is that's to some extent part of what systems inspired is. It's let's experiment together. Here's what my dream is, but what are yours? I love the examples of dreams that you got. So I think it's that piece, and to then keep on focusing on how people pay it forward.
And when you talk about systems inspired, I have some idea, having a systems coaching certification through CRR Global. But when you talk about systems inspired leadership, can you dig into that a little more about what that means?
I think the simplest way to talk about that is from my beingness as a systems inspired leader. I know and trust that I don't have to have all the answers, but that I need to be able to tap it from my team. So system inspired leadership honestly is believing and trusting that the system itself has the answers. Now, the question then is, how do we get that voice of the system so that it can begin to inform us? And I think that that's what the entire book is about. What are the ways in which we can practice and execute on being systems inspired leaders? And it's interesting because the book is based on a lot of the material that underlies that as well, and that lines up empirically is how many leaders that we interviewed, just about every one of them, talked about when they start thinking from that perspective, how there's an outbreath because they don't feel like they feel like they don't have to carry the load. They can look out and ask and trust. So that was a longish answer, but I think you've got it. Absolutely, it's underlying all of the training that we do, even in our core curriculum.
Well, and how do you think about something like? I should probably tell you up front, I'm not a huge fan of the strategic plan, but how do you think of strategic plans when you think of systems leadership?
I think there's some neuroscience that supports us in to go to strategy last. There is some of I'm not an expert in neuroscience, but there is some evidence that shows us that when we are in strategic mind, relationship falls away. The brain simply cannot navigate both of those at the same time. And that's when strategy begins to lose it, because there's not creativity left. So brain science supports that. There's an Aboriginal practice that is about solving problems by having dialogues with questions, just asking questions, not having an answer. And it now is beginning to be used I use it in corporate environments a lot, and with my own team as well. So if you take 15 minutes and say, for 15 minutes, we don't have answers. We just ask questions, even stupid questions. 15 minutes, what we see over and over again is in about the 2-3 minute mark, there's an opinion that is in the tone of the question. Why don't we think about letting go of everything and starting completely differently? That's an open question. You can hear it in the tone. When I ask the question and say, why don't we just let go of everything? You can hear that there's already an opinion in that tone. It's very difficult for us to stay in the question. And what we do when we have that dialogue with questions is we begin to take notes, because over time you begin to see the themes arrive of where there are possible solutions in this creative thinking place. And from those themes, we can then take back to strategy and go, okay, if we look at these themes, where do we tackle the strategy piece from that first? So it really is all, what are the practices that we can use to take us out of the constant thinking mind to creative mind and to relational mind, and then return to strategic thinking. But the strategic roundtable conversation is circling the drain, and it becomes very fatiguing and much less creative, but very fatiguing for the leader.
Well, and I'm still back at, when people are strategically thinking, people go away. So that's a new thought for me, and I'm fascinated by this idea. And I'm sort of testing it in my mind, because you get really smart. You start to get really smart in your own mind as you're thinking of all the solutions and possibilities,
right.
But often you're not thinking about all the people. I also love the idea of some kind of kata process, and that's in my book, that has you come up with a target condition, and then you're trying to figure out what the barriers are to that target condition, and then you're trying to experiment along the way in some kind of continuous improvement. Because even, the first thing that, whenever I say, well, maybe we should do a kata on that, when I am coaching someone, finding the target condition is the hardest thing.
Yes.
Like, it's absolutely the hardest part of the work, is to figure out where we're headed.
Yes.
And so then figuring out, what you want to try to get there is
absolutely. And I think that as we can get a little bit more sophisticated and get more credibility around doing just that, solutions, I keep on thinking about the Ubuntu saying that if we want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
It seems fast in the beginning of somebody go, okay, here's the best thing, let's do it, let's get going. But it stalls at some point. That's where the creativity, and again, that principle that we're talking about in relational systems intelligence, that systems rely on roles for executing of its functions. And the role of wisdom, whether we call it elder or whatever we call it, the role of leader lives within every one of our team members. And when you ask the definition,
absolutely.
When you ask for the definition of systems-inspired leadership, that is one of the edges that leaders need to step over or cross, to really trust that somebody in this system in my team has an answer that I don't have.
Well, it's so interesting, because years before I met you, Mel, my husband, and I did a lot with the Unitarian young adults in consensus decision making. And it's funny how you go full circle in your life, because
Yes.
we're now like talking about consensus decision making again. And it's exactly from the same place of the systems.
Yes, inspired.
Listening deeply to each other.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's this idea that it's just so important it's so much more important to hear people and to integrate what people know into the decision than it is to go rapidly to, unless it's a paint color, in which case designate somebody to pick the paint and go fast.
Yes.
And then use up all the decision making on something that matters.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, I agree with you completely that there is, but part of what you described is the difference between complicated, choosing a paint color, and complex. It's two different tables to sit around. So I agree with you completely. And what is interesting when you just said how our lives circle around, and it really is that, hopefully in terms of evolution, is that upward spiral of evolution. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is ways in which, whether we call it our quantum universe or quantum consciousness, are doing something similar. That's when you begin to get that sense when you start noodling with something. And I talked to what I said earlier. I thought it was my own noodling, but it really is the system itself, the wisdom of the largest system that you can even consider, coming up and tapping different individuals with some insight. And then we build the small pieces that's ours to build, but the evolution of humanity continues to cycle, hopefully upward as well.
If I could have one legacy in my lifetime, it would to destroy Robert's Rules of Order, because it would have implications on moving feminism forward and race forward, and people who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds forward. That one thing destroys decision making in so many groups. And it's I can't even watch it without agony now.
True.
And institutions that act as if they're moral wield it immorally with no reservations whatsoever. And it horrifies me.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge of being human, that we are in the place in our moment in time, across time, systems are in a constant state of emergence. And we see it from that very personal experience place, that in this moment of this now, that is the thing that is, I mean, come on, how can it even be like that? And we don't know yet. There is even in that too is something that is trying to emerge.
Yeah.
And we just don't know what it is. And in this moment of this now, it just frustrates us. And hopefully, and maybe it also motivates us. If that is one of the small pieces that is mine to do, to work that piece, then the bigger the frustration, the more I'll begin to look, and I say us as human beings, begin to look at where's the place that I can find an entry point to begin to needle and noodle with that to make a change. And otherwise we would just be bored.
I know. As a leader, what dreams do you have of creating change? Like, where do you dream of changing the world?
One of the biggest places that these things, we all evolve and shift through this. So if you ask me this question next week, I'll probably have a different answer, maybe. I think the biggest place for us to really pay attention, regardless of profession, of status, of race, of wherever, the place that we need to put our attention on is what we're talking about as that the 3 iterative stages of systemic evolution. Iterative because all 3 happens in every one of the phases, but it's the phases of meet, reveal, align, and act. There's not enough meeting that is happening in our world. We see frozen frames. The moment I think of somebody or something, the moment I think, I don't want to bring politics in it too much, but there was a conversation we had the other day with a community, a European community, where there were people, the topic of the Ukrainian war came up, and there were people speaking about the Russians. And at some stage, somebody put their hand up and said, don't collapse Russians with the leader that you're angry about. I am Russian. And it paused everybody. And you can see how that's the frozen frame. We don't know and we don't pay attention to the curiosity of who really is in front of me. Mm-hmm. It's not the same person that I met last week. It's not the same when it's Asian. It's not a frozen frame. Yeah. It is a human being. So it's that place of meeting. We are living in a time at the moment where everybody is revealing. And in the revealing, it's too much. And then the align and act that comes from that is aggression. So there's a
can you say those 3 again? So that's the meet. And then what's
meet is what we do when we do our design team aligns. That's meeting. Yeah. Reveal is where we begin to get to the nitty-gritty of what's troubling. Reveal also brings us the stuff that are good, but because we may get triggered by the nitty-gritty pieces with the, picked to death by ducks pieces, we get involved in that only. So revealing is bringing the conflict, is bringing highlights, is bringing questions. That's revealing. We can't stay in revealing for too long. Because we get tired. So there's a place where we need to begin to look at where is it that we can align. And you can hear how that's more in the strategic direction. How do we align around this is the one avenue that we can explore now? What are the actions that we can put to that? So I think meet, reveal, align, and act is critical. And I don't think we do enough meeting, not in our meetings, not you and I came on for a little bit and we talked because who showed up on the call is somebody, because of all the cyber stuff that is happening. When I sat with trying to open my YouTube this morning, I had to verify and my passwords and different things. So by the time that I actually said hello to your host, I wasn't whoever she thought that Marita Fridjhon is the best-selling author of the world. I was irritable. So you can see how we don't know. Yeah. And if we don't spend time in that meeting, then we get stuck in the reveal because it blows up. Mm-hmm. And if that blows up, we can't align and act. So you can see how that question about strategy, really, unless we pay attention to meet, reveal, align, and act, we can't get to a strategic goal that we can be successful with.
Well, and I think, for this time, with COVID, people have been through a lot.
Yes.
I see it with my clients as a coach with a full practice. I see the weight my clients have carried over the last few years. I feel it.
Yes.
And so getting to alignment, we don't have any bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people working right now. If we do, they've just entered the workforce. It's the new hires, because those who have carried others, like leaders, they're fatigued in a way that I've never seen. And I don't know how they heal themselves either, because it's heavy.
I agree with you. It's really interesting. Unfortunately, I can't tell you who did the research, but came across a research piece the other day that talked about how the suicide rate for CEOs have rapidly increased over the last year, 18 months. And it's part of that fatigue that you're talking about. And that is why I think it's so important to shift to become systems inspired. That I could come to a meeting as a leader and say, Tim, can we take a minute to just check in?
Yeah.
What is the fatigue that you carry today? What is just everybody take a minute and just bring it. And what is one thing that gives you hope? Anything like that, that have us be able to sit around the table and really see who Melanie is today. Mm-hmm. And really see how everybody is. And it's not about fixing it. It's about, wow, yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, I had a glimpse of this kind of in the height of COVID. And I had, with a group of women, I had done this thing, where I put my arms around myself, and we looked in each other's eyes and we hugged. And I did this with my most cynical tech guy, and he bought in 100%. And I was like, whoa, like, this is a world I was like, I think you need a hug. And he didn't resist. Yes. And I realized what, that need that people have, and that
yes,
I need to not make up anything about people and their needs. Like,
exactly.
I need to give all the squishy love, that I have as a human being, because people don't have the reserves to be on their little island being cynical. They won't make it. That people piece is so important.
Yes, you make me think of our CFO. Sometimes dog sit for her daughter when our daughter goes away, and there are two big dogs, and for some reason or other, one of those dogs, the moment it hears my voice, it talks back. It goes row row row, and every now and again, when she is dog sitting for them, she will call me and go, I have nothing that I need to discuss. I just need to hear, and I can't remember the name of the dog. I just need to hear him. So can you talk a little bit? And the two of you talk a little bit. And then we have this conversation where I talk, and then the dog talks back, and then I talk, and that's the call. That is meeting of a very different, so anything like that. Yeah. It made me think, there was one time I had a call with people, and I'm not bringing names here, but one of them, but has a big Labrador. And the lab comes up and snuggles with them. And so then there was a meeting that I came in, and it was a heavy time. And somebody also, it was a different meeting, somebody had a cat jump on the table and whatever, and people were just down. And I requested that anybody that has a pet, will you please go fetch the pet, bring it here, and give us a shot of what it looks like. And if you don't have a pet, pick the one that you want to pet, okay? And people went, and somebody had a parakeet, and somebody had a cat, and many people had a dog, and somebody else had a bunny, and I was like completely, but it changed the scene. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for us to not make up positivity, but to help all of us hunt for it. Because we go back to the Gottman material that is as true in organizations and for leaders and teams as for everybody else, that there has to be a very high ratio of positive to negative in order to survive. And sometimes we really have to hunt for the positive. It's there, but we have to hunt for it, because the surface has so much that's stressful.
And is there a Gottman book that you would recommend specifically for
teams? He's one of the 7 principles that make marriage work. Is the one that is the research one. But there are others, Malcolm Gladwell, and there are several business publications that have published more up to date. Because in organizations, I think it's Malcolm Gladwell that came up and talked about that in corporate structures, it needs to be something like 18 to 5 or something. It needs to be much higher. So, but just that concept that we need to harvest the positivity, because without that, we can't move on.
Yeah, that book, by the way, The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work, I cleaned out a bookcase recently and found 5 copies because it is the most loaned book on my bookshelf because I send it home with people and most people bring it back eventually. But sometimes it's out and then I order another copy. And so for those of you who are listening, if you want to fix your marriage or your team, it's a great book.
Yeah, because so much of it transfers across. It just it's more sophisticated.
Well, it's just a great book for for relationship. His research is in marriage, but that's just because it's a relationship with stakes attached and sort of some measurement, like your marriage either stays together or it doesn't.
Well, and if you think about one of what he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, what we translated across as the team toxins, because we work in different religious countries and states, and a biblical reference is not always the best thing to have. But if you think about the toxin of stonewalling, how do we do it in business? We don't answer emails.
It's so ubiquitous. And it goes along power lines. Like you always answer your boss, but you don't have to answer the person below you.
So, so much of what is out there. And I think that to get back to the book, I think part of what we wanted to do is to pull together just the diversity, working with the 5 principles of RSI that really underlies and informs all of our work. And then to look, what are the ways in which we can operationalize it also for the leaders who might be, or team members who might be reading the book. So I think that one of the things we're talking about is the ability is how to that each team has its own identity, and each member of the team is the voice of the system. So one of the skills there is how to sense, see, and hear the system. And that's a critical system-inspired leader skill set. Sensing is just noticing when you are sitting on a screen and watching 5 people, seeing what's happening on their faces, but then also sensing something, what that might mean. And just a question about that. What's everybody's sense or feel on our team at the moment? Or I notice that somebody has gone dark and there isn't a note, no, hope you are okay, or anything like that is revealing the system to itself a little bit more so that it can begin to figure out what it needs to do next. So, and tools and skills.
I believe your book is a bestseller.
Indeed, it is.
Congratulations on that. Thank you. Where can people find it?
Amazon.com or Amazon wherever it is, Amazon.ca, it is the biggest platform globally, and in different countries people know where to go because Amazon it's a distributed team as well, so it has Amazon for specific countries as well, and then there are other publishers that also buy into Amazon, and if Amazon is not allowed in certain countries. I don't have all of that in my head, but people who live in different countries will know where and how that works. You got it.
That's great. Yes. Well, it has been just such a pleasure to have you on my show. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Likewise, Melanie, always. And just wishing you the best with everything that's ahead, and continue on. Just makes a difference.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, it is so fun to talk with Marita Fridjhon. She is masterful at systems and what I would call feedback loops. And I love this idea of systems-inspired leadership. The idea that we don't have to lead alone is so much a part of how I think about leadership as well. I really want to challenge you to challenge your own thinking. Think about where you try to go it alone and have to be smart. And I really want to bust you on that. I want you to think about how you can bring others in when you feel like you have to figure it out all by yourself, and where others could help you do it better. It's been great being with you today. Go experiment.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Experimental Leader. We hope you have found value in today's episode because we're dedicated to helping you become the experimental leader you want to be. To access the show notes or learn more about working with Melanie, visit melanieparish.com. Go experiment.